Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm going to let everybody in. So here we go.
Well, good morning. We'll be starting our Prenatal 3 Policy Forum momentarily. My name is Jane Kretzmann, and on behalf of Elders for Infants and our other co-hosts, we want to welcome you to this quarterly forum. Thanks to our co-host, Representative Dave Pinto, and to the University of St. Thomas, Morrison Family College of Health, the School of Social Work, and the School of Education. And we want to thank all of you for your interest and commitment to Prenatal to 3. We began the forums, as some of you know, several years ago, and want to just remind you of our purposes. We have one, to share plans among the many advocates and organizations and coalitions that work in this space. Second, to establish a common base of knowledge. What, as we say, would be irresponsible for us not to know, for those of us who work in the field. And no one knows everything, as we are constantly reminded. The third purpose is to build relationships among advocates, organizations, and coalitions. So we just want to, again, thank you, remind you to mark your calendars for Monday, April 19th for the next quarterly forum. And in the 90 minutes this morning that we have together, we're going to be looking back and looking forward. And we want to begin by remembering our esteemed colleague, the late Senator Jerry Ralph. And in the next moments after that, we will begin a review of what's coming up in the legislative session. So at this time, I want to call on Representative Dave Pinto to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I think we can switch to the next slide. There we go. It looks like one more. Thank you. Those of us who have a great interest in the well-being of Minnesota's young kids lost a champion in December in Senator Jerry Ralph. I had the privilege to work with Senator Ralph in the context of these policy forums. Senator Ralph was elected in 2016, and at that point, we'd had a couple of these forums that had gone along. And Senator Ralph had a great interest in these issues and eagerly agreed to co-host the forums over the past 4 years. And it's been a really terrific partnership. Before being in the legislature, Jerry Ralph was a small business owner. He worked at 3M as an attorney. And perhaps we could flip to the next slide so we can just see a picture of Senator Ralph. He had served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. But I really want to focus on his work in this area of early childhood. He was a leader in many areas, but home visiting was an area that he focused particularly on. And those advocates who worked in that area have emphasized what a great champion he was. He authored legislation that secured more than $30 million in state funding for this critical area. And legislation increased access to community-driven home visiting programs. And he was really committed to improving public agencies' ability to communicate and to share data on families that were eligible for services. He authored legislation to make data sharing easier across early childhood services. And many of us may remember, I certainly do, how often he would talk about the work being done in Dakota County, the Birth to 8 program. If we have folks from Dakota County here, please know that was a common refrain. He would say, you need to look at what's going on there, and he would bring that up. Worked in so many of these areas. He was the legislator of the year for NAMI Minnesota, the National Association on Mental Illness, in 2020, and worked in so many areas that were protecting folks experiencing challenges in their lives. But what struck me the most about Senator Ralph was really his style. He was thoughtful, and really rare in politics was somebody who listened. He focused more on understanding what the other person had to say, much more than on scoring points, and really reflecting on what they had to say. He was committed to serving all of his constituents, recognizing in particular the growing diversity in his the community that he represented, which was St. Cloud. I should have noted that at the very start. And he was invariably kind in his dealings. And one thing that really struck me with that was a tribute on the House floor just a couple weeks ago from Representative Dan Wolgamott. Senator Ralph had defeated Dan Wolgamott in 2016 when he was elected to the Senate, and then 2 years later, Representative Wolgamott was elected to the House. So they were representing the same area as St. Cloud. And if we could flip to this next picture, Representative Wolgamott pointed out on the House floor what good partners they had been after the election. They'd run against one another. Senator Ralph had been gracious during that 2016 election, and then they partnered really closely together in those couple years then that they had together in the legislature. And I hope that we can all, especially in these challenging times in our state and in our country, keep in mind that spirit of working together to try to address big problems. Senator Ralph had his political principles that he followed and his values and his policy positions that didn't always agree with where I was or other people. But where he was recognizing the need to always act in a way that was gracious, that was kind, and was focused on pushing the best for all of us. So I have wonderful memories of him. My heart goes out to his wife Peggy and his family. I had the chance to get to know her just a bit in my work, and I really hope that we can all do our work in the spirit in which he did his. And so rest in peace to Jerry Ralph, and he certainly will be missed in our work. Thank you, Jane. And I'm going to turn things to Representative Lisa Damuth, a colleague of mine in the House who had a chance to do some work with Senator Ralph as well.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. It is an honor to be here, but also to remember Senator Jerry Ralph. I first got to know him in 2018 when I was running for my for election for the House, my first campaign. And he so impressed me with his vast knowledge. As was already mentioned, Senator Ralph was an attorney, he was a small business owner, and then a senator. And with all of that life experience, he was also a Marine. He had served our country in Vietnam. And I was so impressed by the fact that he would take time as I was trying to learn about things that I hadn't heard about or I was unfamiliar. He took the time to explain to me his knowledge and where I could best work and find out more, especially things like this forum that's so important. Getting to know Senator Ralph, also his wife Peggy was with him at almost all events or all different forums that we would have, different campaign things, different legislative and different events. It was just really nice to see the partnership that they had. They were a true team, and I know what an incredible loss this has to be for her. One of the things that did really stand out as I got to know Senator Ralph was he wanted to help the most vulnerable, whether it was the elderly, our young, or those that were living with disability and their families. I remember distinctly one of the times that we were at a forum to do with disabilities. NAMI was there, and the compassion that he showed to all of the testifiers and all those that were sharing their stories, he was taking that to heart. And that is one of the most amazing memories that I have. It was also very important to Senator Ralph that he would work in a bipartisan fashion, as has already been noted. And he worked bipartisanly to get our personal care attendant rate reform in the past increased. And also he was chief author of Minnesota's first bill that would fight the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was something that he did work bipartisanly back in the early days of this. And we are so far past that point. But it was very important that he would set our state up and our residents up to do and to have what we would need. It is a great loss for both this forum, for the legislature, and for our community. Our borders, we share a border. I'm District 13A, and Senator Ralph was a senator for District 14. We share those borders, and so our paths cross, but this is such a great loss for all that he brought, but what a legacy. If I could only live up to part of that legacy in the way that he chose to carry out himself as a person, as a husband, as a father, a stepfather, and a grandfather, and then as a senator too, I would be honored to have had people that would be willing to see the work that I could do. And I hope to be able to do just part of what Senator Ralph has left us all with. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit.
Thank you, Representative Damuth and Representative Pinto. Well, at this time, I want to just acknowledge the monumental task we have before us this morning that we've handed to three people: Claire Sanford, who is with the Minnesota Child Care Association, and Deb Fitzpatrick from Children's Defense Fund, and Laura LaCroix DeLune, who are going to give us a report, three reports basically, on all the coalitions working on prenatal to 3 in the upcoming session. So I'm going to ask for the next slide and just ask you to fasten your seatbelts, and we will have time for questions at the end. And I'm going to be try to be as vigilant as I can about getting staying on time. But we have about 45 minutes to hear presentations. Thank you. And Claire, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Jane. Could I have my first slide, please, Hayana? The monumental task, other than all the work ahead of us, is following those beautiful tributes to Senator Ralph. I distinctly remember my last conversation with him in his office in the Senate on one of the very last days that, people were in person at the legislature last spring. And I always gave him grief because he'd gone to Carleton and I'd gone to St. Olaf, and he was just a genuinely kind man, and he served our country and he served young children. And thank you for the beautiful tributes. It is an incredible loss. I am Claire Sanford, representing the Minnesota Child Care Association. Thanks to the Prenatal to 3 Policy Forum, St. Thomas staff, legislators here, and other presenters and attendees. I'm going to be talking mostly about childcare related efforts affecting the birth to 3 space. And my plan is to do an update on current COVID relief for childcare in Minnesota, the state of priorities that many early childhood lobbyists are approaching this session, and then move to the federal level and update on recent, past, and continuing efforts there, and finish up with a look at President Biden's recently released 3rd round COVID relief plans and what they would mean for childcare and young children and families specifically. So an update on COVID relief efforts in childcare at the state level. There was a new federal relief package approved in late December, thank goodness. We still don't have the official money in the bank, is my understanding, or the official letter from the feds, but the estimate is that Minnesota will get $137 million in childcare specific funds from that relief proposal, which is much larger than what we got in the spring. And we're very thankful to both the Department of Human Services and Governor Walz's administration for hearing childcare concerns about the COVID public health grants cliff that happened in December. Federal money from the previous package had been used to give universal monthly grants to all licensed childcare providers in the state of Minnesota for 6 months. That was ending in December. These grants are incredibly important. Many providers say they're the only reason they're still in business, and operating right now. So the administration decided very quickly that they're going to use some of these new federal funds to continue those grants, at least for January and February. And centers get $8,500 a month, family child care gets $1,200 a month. And they're also going to put $15 million into the Child Care Assistance Program waiting lists, which is predicted to greatly reduce and even clear those waiting lists in the counties. I think it's 12 or 14 counties around the state that have current waiting lists. It's expected to reduce or even eliminate those waiting lists temporarily over the spring and summer. And 82% of families on the Child Care Assistance Program waiting list are noted by our state demographer to be in essential worker occupations. So it's important to get them into the workforce and support the economy and our pandemic response, and of course also their children and their family life. And I want to point out just what a big deal it is that Minnesota has provided so much support throughout the pandemic to childcare. Minnesota is one of only 9 states in the country that has lost less than 25% of its childcare provider capacity during COVID. And in fact, we fare much better than that statistic would lead you to believe, because our current childcare capacity is near 100% of pre-pandemic levels. It's not exactly 100%. Have we lost some providers? Yes. MCCA has lost some providers, and each provider loss is a blow to the community. Did we have enough providers before the pandemic? Nope. But it goes to show just how much the interventions directed from the state, the Walz administration, and the legislature have worked so far. And we know we need to keep going because COVID's not done. So with the rest of that $137 million, the administration will be doing some stakeholder engagement for how best to use the rest of those funds. And I know the legislature, especially the Senate, would like more say in how those funds are spent. And I know the Walz administration wants to work with legislative input. some of the timelines are federally dictated. The feds have told us we need to tell them how we're going to spend this childcare money by late February. That is not a lot of turnaround for a lot of engagement and legislative input. So we will all do the best we can with that. And then some additional supports to help keep childcare operating for families who need it. Our on-site testing is now offered for childcare centers that have above, I think it's 12 or 15 employees statewide. They can order tests and have them shipped to them and use them on site with their employees every other week. And then family childcare and smaller centers are able to use a different portal to order individual test kits for staff. So this universal access to testing is a huge win for our state and our industry. And also last week, a vaccine priority pilot was started for childcare and E12 education staff. And as of last week, it was the first week, and of course there were hiccups. 2,000 doses were available for childcare providers for the whole state, family childcare and centers, and 4,000 were available for E12 staff. And we are so grateful for this prioritization and hope this pilot can continue. Nowhere near meeting the need, as we know none of the vaccine anywhere is near meeting the need right now, but we're very excited that childcare and education has been prioritized because they are frontline heroes. Childcare especially has been operating in person with children and families pretty much all day, every day that they've been allowed to, other than quarantines, this entire time. Next slide, please. So about a year ago, Children's Defense Fund took the lead on convening a wide-ranging group of early childhood advocates from across the state. Thank you so much to Deb Fitzpatrick and Barty Wahi for really taking that on and crystallizing it. And this group has been meeting for about a year now. And it's a very big tent. I think there's like 150 people on the email list from all different parts of the system. But we agreed that this particular group really focuses on the early care and education portion of the early childhood world. And then this year, the Minnesota Child Care Association took the lead on convening a small group of lobbyists that are part of that larger group working on early childhood issues. And both of these efforts meet weekly during session, and hopefully they have some synergy. This slide is a summary, and I realize it's way too text heavy for PowerPoint, but I thought, what the heck? Everyone's going to be looking at this on their own computer. It's not like this is in a big auditorium. So you've got lots of words. This slide is a summary of the main efforts that this group of ECE lobbyists is working on this session related to prenatal to 3 issues for their organizations and clients. It's not exhaustive. I'm sure I've missed something. And in general, we have the hope to achieve no cuts to any funding for young children and families this session. So on the major ECE funding side of priorities being worked on, there's an effort to increase the community education levy. The main 0 to 3 program in that bucket is early childhood family education. There are obviously many other public school-led early childhood programs, though they tend to focus on 3 and 4-year-olds, which is above sort of the purview of this group, which is why I'm only commenting on the community ed levy and ECFE. The Child Care Assistance Program, which we talk about a lot, there are efforts to make sure we stay in federal compliance. Minnesota just got into federal compliance last June, narrowly avoiding sanctions from the feds. Unfortunately, that was only a temporary agreement, and we will fall back out of compliance at the end of this coming September if no additional legislative action is taken. And what action needs to be taken is updating our statutes so that provider reimbursement rates are pegged to the state's most recent child care market rate survey, not the 2018 one, which will soon be not the most recent survey in Minnesota. There are also efforts being worked on to increase reimbursement rates in general, because even the minimum is far below what we need, and to introduce some flexibility for the state to be able to be more nimble when federal funds are available. One of the reasons that Minnesota was one of the last states to come into federal compliance with national child care assistance law was because in Minnesota, we need statute change to change reimbursement rates. Most states didn't need that. They had authority They had administrative authority to use those new federal funds when they came, so they were able to move faster than the legislative process. And we're exploring ways to try to do some of that in Minnesota, obviously with some guardrails and legislative input. We don't want to get rid of that. And there are also some efforts to reprioritize the basic sliding fee wait list in CCAP, which would allow more new families to be served instead of moving families who are already receiving childcare assistance from one part of CCAP to another. On early learning scholarships, generally, we're looking to increase investment. There's an effort to remove the cap on the Pathway 2 allocation, which was put into place legislatively several years ago, and also in general, increase access for birth to 2-year-olds. High-risk birth to 2-year-olds are currently eligible. We'd love to see that expanded so that more infants and toddlers are eligible. And I say we, I'm not saying that every lobbyist in this group agrees on every one of these things. But in general, this is the universe of things being worked on. And then also there's just a lot of thought going into transforming the overall financing of the early childhood education system in our state. It does not work the way it's currently set up. And we're hoping we can really take this moment of the pandemic to step back and say, how do we really change this for the better going forward? On the early childhood workforce side, there is an effort to create a new childcare workforce tax credit, which would be a compensation support for licensed providers in either centers or family childcare based on participation in Parent Aware and individual education level of the person getting the credit. It would be refundable and again, act as basically a wage boost for the field for individuals. General support for teach and retain that help early childhood professionals get additional educational qualifications and also stay in the field with some compensation support. On the licensing side, there's a lot going on this year, especially with the Family Child Care Task Force report about to be released here in a few weeks. I know Rep. Damath and others that I can't see who may be on this presentation have given a lot of their time and thought and life to. So there are efforts on both the center and the family child care side to move toward a risk-based licensing system and implement other new family child care models specifically, and some other things in those recommendations. Then there are grant programs for child care facilities and child care infrastructure building and training that we'd really like to see renewed or funded across the state. And obviously the continuation of COVID response. Next slide, please. I want to touch briefly on federal advocacy that the ECE community has worked on. It really ramped up over the summer when it became clear that only the federal government could kick in the kind of resources needed to respond in the pandemic. But federal advocacy is also key in this movement to transform the system of early childhood financing in our country. So over the summer, a group of us were involved in Zooms with Representatives Craig, Phillips, Emmer, Stauber, McCollum, Senator Smith, Senator Klobuchar. Many of those were with the members themselves, which is another COVID benefit. Access is easier and more powerful. And we had providers, parents, and community stakeholder constituents on those. There's another one with Rep. Craig tomorrow. And we really hammered home the need for additional COVID relief funding and results that happened, at least partially from that we'll gladly claim to be part of. We had those legislators sign on to bills, up the dollar amount they were willing to spend on childcare, really work with the Problem Solvers Caucus, change language in the new federal relief package in concert with feedback from the Governor Walz administration to make sure these funds would be flexible and really be able to get out to providers right away. So we were continuing the federal advocacy big time, especially because we have a new administration and a significant possibility not only for additional COVID response funds, but also big new thinking on childcare and early childhood as a whole. And we really need and want to take this moment to respect that the pandemic has laid bare that the nation's has laid bare our nation's dependence on this underfunded and underappreciated system that only worked economically pre-pandemic because it is built on a foundation of ridiculously low compensation for the work done. And we need to change that. Next slide, please. And before I turn it over to Deb Fitzpatrick, I'll touch briefly on the new President Biden COVID relief proposal that was just released, I think, a week or so ago. And the childcare components in that, the young children components in that, of course, the package is huge and part of a much larger relief plan than just this early childhood stuff. There are other things that are very big for families of very young children. There's minimum wage, sick time, additional pandemic stimulus checks, and so on and so forth. But on the childcare side, this new proposal would offer an additional $25 billion childcare stabilization fund nationwide, an additional $15 billion in childcare development and block grant funding. And those would continue the down payment of the $10 billion of relief in December to get us to $50 billion total, which is what our industry has been asking for. And there are also tax credits that are just one time, temporary in this proposal. The child tax credit increases and actually moves up even more significantly for children in the birth to 6 age group. And the child and dependent care tax credit also increases. And these are really setting the precedent, and we want to keep the momentum going, even though these are only temporary items right now, kind of like the public health supports in Minnesota, the universal monthly grants to providers are temporary. They're setting the precedent for supporting the childcare field and supporting young children and the workforce that supports them in a different way. And we need to figure out how to move from the COVID rescue frame to how do we use some of these precedents that have been set in that frame to real structural change, using the resources that are coming in some of these COVID-related proposals. So I apologize, I probably ran a little over time and talked really, really fast, but I look forward to questions and discussion later. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claire. And we will be, we are going to be finishing by 10 after 10 to get to the questions and answers. And thank you for your presentation. And we're going to call up Deb Fitzpatrick next. Please use the chat function for your questions, and we will sort through those and use those when we have our discussion at the last part of the meeting. So Deb Fitzpatrick, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Claire. You really teed up the things I'm hoping to talk about today well. So thanks for the opportunity. Could you move to the first slide, please? So as Claire mentioned, I wanted to take a little bit of an opportunity today in light of this expanded understanding of the role childcare plays as a foundational element in our economy and in our families, to discuss some of the exciting work that's happening in our state to kind of think about how are we launching from this emergency support stage that we're in now to the longer term transformational change that we know we need, because the economics of this particular sector just don't work for both providers and families. So we do have really exciting work happening, I think, in 3 categories. The first, thinking about how we can generate the necessary revenue to fully fund the true and total cost, which is kind of in the middle. So that's sort of a second bucket, really starting to develop our own state understanding of what the true and total cost of a high quality, affordable system might look like in the state of Minnesota. And then thinking about how are we then getting those resources out to providers and families through different ways of thinking about governance and distribution of resources. Next slide, please. So wanted to start with a project that is being carried out through the EPIC research component of Education Minnesota, along with Isaiah's Kids Count on Us campaign. To really, again, re-envision how we think about early care and education, the system level distribution mechanism, et cetera. And a big part of this project, so just keying up, I'm not going to spend a ton of time getting into the details here, not only because we don't have a lot of time, but there is an upcoming press conference this Wednesday on the 27th to release this research. So I think that will be very exciting, and I think maybe we can send out some information on how folks can view that. But one of the key recommendations coming out of this project is the creation of a new Minnesota Department of Early Care and Education, and Representative Pinto is working on advancing that piece of legislation. So he may say more about that during his opportunity to share remarks later in the program. But I also want to just highlight that this is really looking at a pathway to creating universal childcare access, defined as families paying no more than 7% of income towards childcare, and with a specific lens on racial equity, both in the workforce and in the child context. Next slide, please. So also as part of this effort, and just in a variety of places, we've been looking to other states. And again, I think Representative Pinto is looking to bring forward a proposal that would create a task force to help us think through as a state how we get from here to there. Thinking about Washington State as a model where they've established a vision in state law of, again, getting to that place of all families having access with no more than 7% of income. So looking for that proposal coming forward this session is one mechanism to help us as a state, kind of, like I said, get from here to there. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to refresh everybody's memory. Back in October, October 14th, to be specific, the Transforming the Financing of Early Care and Education work that's been being done through Transforming Minnesota's Early Childhood Workforce project was presented to this group. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already seen that, to go back and take a look. It basically, next slide, please, kind of lays out both the costs and some thoughts about how we might transition from where we are now, again, to maybe a 10-year vision of getting to that place of all families, regardless of income, having access to high quality, affordable care. Next slide, please. So since October, this project has been doing some additional work to really dig a little bit deeper on the cost modeling, getting more granular, also thinking about the coordination between the work that I just mentioned earlier happening with Isaiah and the EPIC research project, and what I will talk about next in terms of revenue, and getting feedback and refining and revising. So this is just an important, again, step or piece of an overall picture that we need to understand in order to kind of move ahead. So much thanks to this group for continuing that important work. Next slide, please. And then finally, just wanted to mention that we are continuing, we launched in November this project to look at how we might grow the revenue pie for early childhood care and education in the state of Minnesota. We are getting technical assistance now from the Children's Funding Project to really dig in deeply and explore various options and think about how we can, again, recognize that going back to the general fund has not served us well in terms of being able to fully support the system that we need. So wanting to advance that conversation about various options within the state. The YouTube video is linked here. If you hadn't had a chance to participate in that webinar back in November and you're interested in viewing more, you can check that out there. All right, next slide, please. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit now to talk a little bit about another area of policy that Children's Defense Fund has been involved in. Put a plug in for a hearing that Representative Pinto is having tomorrow at 8:30, where the Prenatal to 3 Policy Impact Center is going to be presenting on how Minnesota fares And as you can see from this slide, paid family leave is one of the key policy areas where the state has not advanced evidence-based policy. The Minnesota House did pass a robust policy last session, supported by a coalition of over 40 organizations, co-chaired by the Children's Defense Fund, as I mentioned, AFL-CIO, and Isaiah. We expect the House to be moving that policy again this year, and really hopeful that the Senate will take it up. Next slide, please. So we know that there are a lot of reasons that the state needs this particular program. There's new research out of the US Department of Labor continuing to document the need and disparities related to access, particularly for low-income workers. The greater need for leave, need for longer leaves, less pay available, more job loss associated for leaves for those low-income workers. And of course, COVID has made the need more apparent than ever. The programs in 5 states that are operating now have been a vital support to workers during COVID-19. Rhode Island, for example, has allowed workers that have had to stay home due to school closures or childcare closures to take advantage of that program. These programs have remained solid despite increased usage during the pandemic. So again, a really important time to be thinking about how this might support our state. Next slide, please. I just want to refresh everybody's memories about all the amazing research basis for why this policy makes sense for the state as it relates to prenatal to 3. The one thing I did want to lift up, and I know this group has been looking carefully at the role of dads over the last year. It's been a particular focus of the forum. We know that these programs increase both the number and duration of paternity leaves, which have lifelong impacts for children, attachment of fathers to families. So again, lots of reasons to be wanting to move this kind of a policy forward. Next slide, please. Finally, just wanted to say real quickly that this is a different way of thinking about benefits. This represents a different way. This is the way a social insurance program is the way all 8 states in the United States and most of the rest of the world approach this. It's a really important way to think about it because it's a portable benefit that's not attached to a specific employer. And we've seen during COVID-19 how important it is that people have the support they need regardless of their employment situation. Next slide, please. Finally, just wanted to remind people about kind of the high level policy elements. The proposal would provide up to 12 weeks of leave for both health conditions and another 12 for family care. It provides a progressive wage replacement, employment protections, and people do have to be attached to the workforce at some point in the last year, but at a fairly low rate of about $3,000. So I'm going to stop there. I know that we are going to be turning it over. This kind of moved into the prenatal to 3 for coalition space because the Prenatal to 3 coalition is also supporting this particular policy. So I'll stop there and be available for questions later.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deb. That was a great overview. I want to welcome Laura LaCroix-DeLune in just a second, but also to clarify that when you submit questions and answers in the chat, please indicate who you'd like to answer those. That would help us. So that's just a housekeeping matter. And with that, we'll proceed to hear from the Prenatal to 3 Coalition and the Minnesota Coalition for Targeted Home Visiting. Thank you, Laura. Welcome.
Thank you. You can move ahead to the next slide. So a little bit about the Prenatal to 3 Coalition. I wanted to just make sure everybody knew that the coalition has co-chairs, Barty Wahi with the Children's Defense Fund Minnesota and Nancy Jost with the West Central Initiative. We convened together because we know this time prenatal to age 3 is absolutely critical and can positively shape life outcomes moving forward. Our vision is really about addressing racial, economic, and geographic inequities so that all Minnesota children can thrive, and that we really are working towards raising awareness about the importance of supporting children and families beginning prenatally and helping families receive investments to give them the best start and best stable start. Next slide. So you will see we have we've categorized our policy priorities in 2 key areas. We have a section of our agenda around strong families. So making sure that Minnesota's future prosperity depends on the well-being of every family, every infant, and every young child. This is really about focusing on healthy development and attachment as a fundamental need of every child. And it also takes into consideration that human development begins at birth and can have, based on one's experiences, can really dictate how one's health and economic success move forward. We also focus on early care and education for infants and toddlers, whether it's in childcare centers, family homes, or with a family friend or neighbor care. I will spend less of my time focusing on the ECE section of the agenda since we've just heard from both Claire and Deb. I do want to say that just so that everyone is aware, the Prenatal to 3 Coalition works with many of its partners to get this work done. So Deb Fitzpatrick, who you just heard from, she provides the lobbying support for the Prenatal to 3 Coalition. And then we lean into other partners to either lead through a lobbying effort to support by helping mobilize people who care about infants and toddlers and want to make sure their legislators are aware that it matters to them in their community, endorsing different parts of the agenda. And then we have a number of people who are with us as thought partners, that they know that these are a critical time period. They just don't have the capacity to spend time at the legislature. Next slide. So under the strong families priorities, you'll see we have 3 main goals. Deb just talked about the access to paid family medical leave. We know that this is a top priority for a lot of our families across the state. We know that there are some incredibly important benefits in that prenatal to 3 time period if all families had access to paid family leave. We also have an overarching goal around protecting investments in maternal and child health, as well as basic needs. We know that this pandemic has it's really shown light into the inequities that exist in families, that families with less have even less, more, and that is even more so as a result of the pandemic. And then we have families who are doing okay that haven't had that big of an impact. So that disparity and those inequities have continued to grow. The next goal is around increasing access and resources for culturally responsive, trauma-informed health, mental health, and oral health care. Next slide. Under that section, we have a number of priorities that I just wanted to raise awareness around. We are working with a number of different partners to help extend the Medicaid benefit to the birth giver and children postpartum for the first year of life. So currently, if somebody is eligible for medical assistance, the medical assistance ends 2 months postpartum. For any of you who have given birth, you know you are barely aware of what day of the week it is or what time of the day it is as you're caring for a newborn. And it makes it incredibly difficult for the caregiver, for the mother to receive postpartum care in those time frames. So we're really hoping to extend it the first year of life, if at all possible, because we know it will help reduce some health inequities for both mom and baby. We're also, and we're leaning into our partnerships with the Home Visiting Coalition and some of the healthcare advocates on this space. We are also supporting the more culturally responsive strategies to support our Black and Indigenous birth givers and families. We are really specifically focusing on the Black American-born African-American community and Indigenous communities because the maternal and infant health outcomes are the inequities are 2 to 3 times, their health outcomes are 2 to 3 times worse than for a white woman in this state. And so these inequities are regardless of income, regardless of education levels. And so we really do need to put some continuous efforts behind this and look at some strategies, innovative strategies moving forward. We're leaning into our partnership with the iChirp group, which is the Integrated Care for High-Risk Pregnancies. And we're also working closely with NINDE to help us better understand some strategies coming from within these cultural communities. Our third priority is around access to prenatal care in rural communities. This is a tough one because we do not have any key partners leading in this space, and yet we know access to prenatal care and infant health has decreased in our rural communities. There are some parts of the state where you actually, if you have a high-risk pregnancy up in Northwest Minnesota, you leave the state to go get your high-risk care. You have to go over to North Dakota if you're up in Fergus Falls or if you're up in Moorhead. So we're not able to take care of our own children. They're not even birthed here in our state. They are birthed in another state. So we have some real issues here. We are using this year as a way to raise awareness because we do not have any key partners who we've identified who will work on this with us yet. We are also working on culturally responsive family home visiting and group-based services. The Prenatal 3 Coalition is working with the Targeted Home Visiting Coalition to really allow resources to go to innovative programs or community-driven solutions. I see that we have Senator Wickland on this call with us, and she's signed on to this bill again. She has been our Democratic lead on the bill, along with Senator Jerry Rolfe for the last several years. So we're excited to have her continued support. We're also looking to extend telehealth services for mental health, home visiting, and well child visits. What we found during the pandemic is that people will access telehealth services differently. So there were some surprises about who was accessing and who wasn't. There are a number of people who are providing the home visiting or mental health services that would like to see these visits continue. We don't want to replace the in-home visit completely, but we want to be able to access telehealth services moving forward. And so there is a large effort going forward in the Senate. My understanding is Senator Rosen is carrying a very large telehealth bill. We're hoping our colleagues in the House will also consider moving something like this and gathering support from many of you here as well. The other area we have two more areas under the Strong Families I just want to identify is increased access to oral health for young children. I believe that it was last week that that Representative Pinto's committee heard about the lack of dental services for infants and toddlers. This is particularly difficult in Greater Minnesota and also for MA period. It's difficult to find a dentist who will receive or use MA because their reimbursements are so low. So we're leaning into our partnership with the Children's Dental Services. And then finally, we're looking at increasing infant and early mental health services and consultation. This pandemic has really shone lights on the mental health needs of families across the board. And Minnesota has an innovative infant and early childhood mental health consultation services that states across the country have been trying to duplicate or learn from. So we would like to see these consultation services expanded, making it available to more people to help them better understand those. For infants and toddlers, how does mental health and how does trauma show up in children early on? And then the services, funding for services is also in need. So next slide. You heard a lot about many of the early childhood priorities that are going forward. One that we want to also raise up that the Prenatal to 3 Coalition has been focusing on is the work of family, friend, and neighbor care. We think this is really critically important. The state does not generally support family, friend, and neighbor providers. There has been history off and on of the state trying to support family members, friends, and neighbors who are providing care. This is important because, especially to this group of advocates, because about 40% of all infants and toddlers in the state of Minnesota are cared for by a family, friend, or neighbor. We understand that not everybody who provides this care would consider themselves a family, friend, and neighbor care, but there is a growing number of people who are providing care to children within their community. You see this a lot within our immigrant communities, our newly arriving families, our BIPOC communities, particularly. And it's important that we provide access to training and learning resources in a way that make it more accessible to families as much as possible. All right, next slide. I just wanted to highlight a number of the different participating organizations. Again, different organizations participate differently with the Prenatal to 3 Coalition, but it's a broad group of folks who are working on the maternal and child health side of work, folks who are more culturally focused in their efforts, working within different communities, focusing on mental health, Head Start, etc. So I just think it's important for you to see those who participate more regularly. And then my last slide. I just wanted to, it's not there. Okay, so if you want to have access to us, we'll make sure you can reach out to us on contacts. So that's it. I will turn it back to Jane.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. And I want to just add, since we have a couple of minutes, that there's a lot to digest here, and we are recording the session as we have in the past, so that those of you who've registered will get a notice, and you'll be able to review this and have a chance to look at the slides again, because I just want to underscore how much work people are doing to move forward agendas, and it's very exciting. So I just want to thank you. And I'm noting that we have a number of questions coming in through the chat, and we will be coming to those. So we're running a few minutes early, which is kind of a nice thing. And at this point, I think it's a good time to call on Representative Pinto, and we'll be hearing from the legislature about what they're looking forward to in this session. So thanks again to our presenters.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks everybody. And yeah, thank you to the folks who walked us through that, Claire and Deb and Laura. That was really helpful to pull things together. Again, I'm Representative Dave Pinto. I'm the chair of the House Early Childhood Finance and Policy Committee, and co-host and founder of the forums. And so glad to be with you all. I'm noticing we have more than 150 people joining us in this virtual session, and so just delighted to have you do that. I want to make sure to note a few special guests that we have with us. We're joined by a number of elected officials, including the vice chair of the House Early Childhood Committee, Representative Lori Pryor from Minnetonka, as well as the past vice chair, Representative Carly Katiza-Wattoon from Eden Prairie, and then some other representatives as well. We're joined by Jess Hansen from Burnsville, Liz Bolden from Rochester, John Hewitt, Apple Valley, Susan Ackland from St. Peter, and Kelly Morrison from Deep Haven. And so glad to have them join us. And then, as was mentioned, Senator Melissa Wickland, who's been a real partner of mine in the Senate, is joining us as well. She represents Bloomington, Richfield area. And then finally, Ramsey County Commissioner Mary Jo McGuire, who's been a mentor and friend for so long for me, and so glad to have her on as well. I don't think I missed anybody, but we're so glad to have these folks join us and everybody else as well. So just I'll provide a couple high-level thoughts. We can flip to the slide. I've just got the one slide. Just to make sure folks are aware that our House Early Childhood Committee meets every Tuesday and Thursday from 8:30 to 10. We'd be glad to have you join us. Our meetings are all broadcast, so please check that out. Our focus for this session is really going to be largely on the 2-year budget. That's for each of the odd year sessions. That's a lot of the focus. And of course, responding and dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Really broadly, some of these things have been alluded to before. We are looking at pushing towards having university accessible, high quality early care and learning, recognizing what a need there is for that. This was discussed earlier this morning, and trying to get us in that direction. So I'm looking at having a task force to kind of say concretely how we get there. But one of the pieces is this agency reorganization that was referenced before. The idea of a department of early care and education, early care and learning, that would pull these different pieces together. There'll be more on that as we go along, but I want to make sure to recognize that that's an important component. And then having some significant investments in the areas that have been discussed up until now. We really want to make sure to recognize that not only should we be avoiding cuts right now, we really need to be investing in what has been a severely underinvested area. And when you think about the benefits across a wide range, from allowing parents to work and employers to expand, but then recognizing the benefits for young kids receiving high quality care and learning, there's just no substitute for that. I want to make sure that we recognize too that we're talking, when I say, you notice the word development in there as well, that we're not just talking about when kids are not in the care of their parents, but making sure that we're really enhancing development from prenatal all the way on up. Some of those pieces are going to be squarely in the jurisdiction of the committee that I chair. Sometimes there'll be more in the jurisdiction of other committees, but just as a whole, this is a focus for me, and I know for other folks as well. And then there'll be some other pieces as well. Those have been alluded to previously. The Family Child Care Task Force will be coming up with recommendations. Representative Damath, who we're going to hear from in just a second, is on that task force. I'll defer to her, but we'll be hearing back on some of the regulatory changes that will make things easier for providers, and still making sure to have our kids have high quality and safe settings. And we're continuing to look at some system reforms, taking a look at the parent aware rating system that we have, assessing quality, the kindergarten readiness assessment, and other pieces. And I guess I would direct folks in particular to look back at what was previously House File 1 in the past 2 years, the Great Start for All Minnesota Children Act, as being a bit of a guide, at least in terms of principles, to say, look, let's pull in all the different approaches that we have and make sure that we have finally a comprehensive way of making sure that every one of our children gets off to a great start. And so I'm excited to be doing that work. We'll have more discussion and questions, but many thanks again, everybody who's joined us this morning. And I'll turn things over for the GOP perspective to Representative Damath. I should just note real briefly that we tried to have, we did reach out to-
is thinking it's funny because I ordered some twin things to replace them.
We'll get that muted. I did reach out to the Senate majority, and unfortunately they were unable to have somebody join us this morning. But hopefully Representative Damath will be able to talk a bit about her perspective from that as well. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. It is, again, an honor to be here and to visit. We know the importance of that prenatal to 3, the importance of that child growth, and also for families and how they're developing. I have the privilege of serving District 13A, which is in central Minnesota, and this is my second term in the legislature, my second opportunity to also serve on the Early Childhood Committee, and I'm very much looking forward to that work that we're continuing to do. As was mentioned before, we have a budget, and unfortunately we have a budget deficit this year. And so that is going to, as we are waiting for targets to come out, that is going to lean hard and fast to see how can we take the dollars that we have and spend them best. That's an important thing to keep in mind. I have also realized that before COVID, in the family child care industry, we had a number of providers that were continually dropping out of that industry. What was happening is our workforce, we had a very low unemployment rate. Our workforce was facing shortages a lot of times because families could not find adequate childcare for their kids. They couldn't find safe places, especially in greater Minnesota, in the same location maybe that they were working. Out of that came in 2019, the Family Child Care Task Force. And was mentioned, I have the privilege of serving on that task force along with Senator Wickland, who I know is on the call too. Our co-chairs were Senator Kiffmeyer and Representative Wazelwick. And the work that was done during that Family Child Care Care Task Force, we are actually finishing up with a final report. We have our last meeting this Thursday, and that final report will then go to the legislature in February to be able to say, how can we best stand up that industry of family childcare to serve families, to serve kids, and to serve our state at large. And so that work, keep watching for that great important work that was done there. Out of that, I had also carried a bill in 2019 asking for an ombudsperson for the family child care. We were facing a number of challenges where questions weren't getting answered. I am now carrying that bill again this year. I know one of our testifiers, I think earlier, a presenter, I'm not sure if it was Deb or Laura, my notes aren't exactly clear. I'm talking about that lack of dental care access for our young kids. One of the things that I have carried back in March of 2020, and then it kind of got set to the side, I'll be carrying that again, is a dental bill that would be a loan forgiveness program, trying to make sure that we are getting the best dental care across our state so it's easier access to our families. We know unmet dental needs, especially in our kids as they hit school, they're losing days in school. We know it's a higher cost in our healthcare system, emergency room visits that could maybe be avoided if they had access to dental care, all the way from those earliest kids as those teeth are coming through, and also training parents. So be watching for that will come out. Along with, as we are doing our work, one of the things that I feel is very important and our caucus definitely supports is early learning scholarships. That gives families an opportunity to access what they need for their earliest learners in the best way that is going to fit them in their family, in their location. And then, as was also mentioned, that infant mother mortality rate and the disparity in the health outcomes. I had the opportunity to serve as vice chair of the Select Committee on Racial Justice this fall as we were doing the work. One of the disparities, as was talked about, that shows up there is that difference. I know in the last biennium, more dollars were put into the doula program, and that has some definite benefits. So as we move forward in the legislative session, looking at all creative ways to meet the needs of Minnesotans is what we're doing. I will not take any more time right now. I'm interested in hearing the questions that are going to come forward, and I thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Demuth and Representative Pinto. This is a wonderful report. And we're going to shift into the question and answer section. And I just am noting we've got quite a long list, but I wanted to just draw your attention to one comment that came in from Matt Larson from the National Parents Association. And this really reflects how Prenatal to 3 covers so many policy areas. And this one has to do with child support, and it reflects back on the work that the elders and the forum did regarding Black fathers earlier in 2020. And this is basically a comment and just something we want to call out. Please address this to all political leaders. We want to know where you stand on this issue. The question concerns custody law for children birth to 3. In a divorce or separation, children do best when they can spend equal time with both their fit and loving parents. Sadly, Minnesota has a winner-take-all custody law, and those parents who are the winners are the custodial parents, and the loser often becomes the visitor parent. So this primary custody arrangement is very difficult for children, but for divorce lawyers, there is a lot of money to be made in the custody realm. So we have immense evidence of shared parenting being a good idea. I'm kind of summarizing this. And an important note is that children of color almost never get equal access to both their parents in a separation. So I think we want to just call that out and make sure that we not lose track of that important role of dads and the whole parenting child custody area. So I'm going to ask Deb Fitzpatrick, are your groups paying attention to early literacy training for during the ages of 0 to 3?
I think that would be a great issue to bring to the ECE advocates space. So I would encourage you to reach out to me, and we could go ahead and schedule an opportunity for that issue to come forward. It hasn't been an issue that has been discussed in our group yet, but we're always bringing forward new issues for consideration. And one of the key goals of that ECE Advocates group, it meets every Tuesday at 1, is to increase our knowledge about all of the pieces of the system and to build relationships. So I would appreciate it if you'd reach out to me if that's an issue that you have some expertise on that we could bring forward to the group.
Okay, that's helpful. We'll have for people that we'll have to get email addresses out, but we will figure that out. So for the Minnesota Child Care Association, Claire Sanford and anyone else with knowledge, have we as a state ever researched the impact of providing public insurance as a benefit to all child care providers and their families? I believe that would be public medical insurance. Is that, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer.
I don't know that I do either, but thank you for the question. It is huge. I mean, it is something that providers talk about all the time in terms of something that's high on their priority list is the ability to access affordable health insurance. I don't know of any research that's been done in that area, but I could certainly look into it. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not giving a very good answer to this question because my basic answer is I don't know, but ensuring and providing appropriate benefits that providers can access is a huge piece of retention in the field and something that we definitely do care about and should be looking at.
Okay, thank you. I think, again, these are questions that kind of help us think about next steps or new things. We have a question about specific policy proposals to support FFN caregivers. And Laura, I think that would be your domain.
Sure, thank you. Yes, there is Representative Mike Howard from Richfield. He is introducing a bill again this year to support FFM providers. And the bill that is moving forward is similar to what was supported back in 2008 to 2009. It might have been 07, 08. But the purpose of the bill is to help support FFM providers who operate in a network, like an informal network. So many FFM providers across the state, in greater Minnesota, here in the Twin Cities, are meeting in small informal networks where they actually provide training to those who are providing FFN care around health and safety and education. So these networks would then be able to access some public resources so that they could have more educational materials, help cover some of the cost of the training. Some FFM providers are interested in then moving into the license world. So for those who are become a licensed provider, so for those who are interested in going down that road, that they have access to that. And then eligible grantees, because they're informal networks, have we've seen some local public health departments. I know in Bloomington, they've been helping provide resources to because it's Bloomington Richfield, they've been helping provide some resources to LaRed or be a fiscal host for some of their work. Down in Scott County, they're working, the local public health department is working with their libraries. And then down in Rice County, there's a number of different networks. So we're trying to figure out the best way to make resources available to these informal networks. Last year, Representative Howard introduced this bill and it became part of House File 1. We're still waiting to see what the strategy is to move this bill forward in 2021.
Jane, I might add for folks, and just to confirm that, this area of family, friend, and neighbor care, for those who aren't as familiar with it, FFN is a really substantial part of how little kids receive early care and learning in our state. You know, we sort of don't think of it as much, and yet it's such a substantial part. And just to confirm, I do expect that as our main budget proposal moves forward, that there will be some form of support similar to what was moving forward last year in the Great Start for All Minnesota Children Act, because it's such an important component for so many kids in our state. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question about policy proposals, and this is to target or prioritize funds from the federal $50 billion to independent childcare centers, not necessarily the large chains, especially in underserved communities. So I think the question is, how are those decisions made? And I don't know whether it's Laura or Claire. I don't mean Laura, but I mean Deb or Claire, who might know a little bit about the federal policies that are being considered.
Thank you, Jane. I can take that. The federal language, at least for the most recent federal COVID relief bill, was changed significantly during the process and ended up in what we think is a good place that is very flexible for all providers. There were some complaints about the earlier federal funding that it was mostly targeted, or some states only targeted that funding to providers who served low-income children on the Child Care Assistance Program. So this funding language was written very explicitly to be able to support all providers, whether they serve children on the Child Care Assistance Program or not. And to this question, the decisions about who in the state gets grants or other things funded by that federal money is a state decision. So that's made with input from the Children's Cabinet, the Governor's Office, the Department of Human Services, the legislature. And there has been, to the best of my knowledge, up until now, there's been absolutely no sort of disincentive or anything in the structure of how funds have been distributed that would aim them more towards larger providers of childcare than smaller independent providers. The state uses, for example, the public health support grants have been universal. They have gone to every single provider at the same dollar amount in the state. And as we look at another potential round, both the rest of this current federal funding that came out of late December, and perhaps, as the questioner asked, about some additional funding that might come out with President Biden's next sort of third round proposal for COVID relief, those decisions are made at the state level. And in order to have input on those decisions, I think the best thing to do is to email concerns or questions directly to the Children's Cabinet, which coordinates among agencies and the Governor's Office at the state level. And I'm not sure, can I put that in the chat? I'm happy to put that email address in the chat, because they're always looking for input on how to facilitate the use of those funds.
That sounds like a good idea. I think we can also post this in our memo back to those of you who've registered, so that people know where they can write with that question. So we have another comment from Mary Jo McGuire. Thanks for the work on this important topic, and that Ramsey County is committed to being a strong partner, and grateful for the Representative Pinto's on the Early Childhood Committee. Gail Kelly from, outgoing former executive of the Minnesota Head Start Association, wanted to inform everyone of a PBS documentary that's coming out on Minnesota's oral health crisis. This will be on February 7th, and we have a trailer linked to that, and that's another item that we can send out to our group of all of you who have signed on. So we've had another question or comment come in about really getting answers to the question around particularly Black dads and how they are discriminated against in terms of our systemic racism. and that wanting to get some answers about how various elected officials view the issue, and I'm wondering about if Representative Demuth, would you want to comment a bit about the work of the task force you were on and led this last fall?
Thanks, Jane.
As just spending a few minutes before we move on to the next question.
Sure. Thank you for the
go ahead.
opportunity. Was there a specific question, or was it just in general from what you were just sharing?
I can help you out maybe. I answered the question about specifically parents in general. Right now in the state of Minnesota, we have a primary custody system where one parent becomes the winner parent and the other parent is the loser parent. And unless you have money for an attorney and you look the part, you're usually going to lose custody of your children being an African-American man. And in North Minneapolis, that's typically the case. And there's a lot of financial incentive behind this. And we're not willing to look at other states that have changed their laws into a shared parenting law. The state of Kentucky did this, and it's been absolutely wonderful for children. We have decades of data and studies that have been done all across the globe that show children do best when they have both children equally in their life. And unfortunately, that's just not what we do in the state of Minnesota. And we turn it into a knockdown, drag out custody fight. And unfortunately, all the representatives here that I recognize support that, because the Bar Association, through their other special interests, have made sure that there is a custody fight in divorce court. And it costs typically around $100,000 per parent. And if you want to get shared parenting, you have to do that. And if you're a child of color and then you have two parents that can't afford that, you're not going to get that. And it will turn one parent into the provider that pays all the money, and the other parent is then shackled to the child care. And it's been going on for decades here. And it's really it's just a really sad thing. And I understand Representative Lisa there supports this and doesn't want to change custody law to a shared parenting, which is what science supports. And I was wondering if you could address that.
Sure, happy to address that. As far as the shared parenting, I know a bill did come through on the House floor, and I'm not exactly sure if it was in 19 or the beginning of 20 that I did vote yes for. And I don't have the bill number in front of me, just going off of memory. What I can tell you, though, is the work that we did on the Select Committee on Racial Justice did not look specifically on the racial breakdown and how it directly affected kids with the shared parenting piece. I think that's an important topic. I think it's something that could definitely be looked at as far as what percentages and how that actually works out. And I think as the work goes forward in this legislative session, this would be the time to bring that up. Is there a large disparity racially based in the shared parenting concern also? So happy to answer that and look forward to more conversation as we move forward.
Well, I apologize. I thought you were against shared parenting. I was wrong, and I appreciate your support. We're trying to convince as many people as we can. Through the power of social media, I've talked to probably thousands of African-American dads from birth to 3 and beyond that are locked out of their children's lives, and they're turned into a child support payment, because child support is determined by how much time you spend with your child in the state of Minnesota. It's actually a calculator, and you can Google it. So there's a huge incentive for one parent to try to take away as much parenting time as possible, and that destroys the child's life from birth on. There's no bonding, there's nothing, and it's just nefariously supported by the Bar Association, and they got their hand in everything. And I appreciate you answering that, Representative. If any other representatives want to step up and answer if they support that or not, that'd be great. I thank you.
And I'm going to step in just a little bit and to say that we're coming close to the end, but I don't want to lose track of what you've raised here. And I know that there are others who will be open to hearing from you. So continue to use the chat for your questions. And I want to thank that thank Matt for his comment. But we're going to stay with the chat function here, and we've got about 1 more minute. And let's just see if I'm just looking here. But this has been this is an area where prenatal to 3 is an area of immense importance, and we just want to thank everyone for your passion and commitment. So at this point, I'd like to just remind you that our next gathering is April 19th. And there's one other quick invitation I want to offer from Mary K. Stronach from the elders. She's working on it with a small group about housing and how family stress and brain development are affecting the housing crisis is affecting our youngest kids. So many areas, but if you're interested in working on that, please put your name in the chat along with an email address and we'll follow up. So at this time, I'd like to just call on Representative Pinto. Do you want to say a few words here to bring us home?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you to everybody for your work, and just a reminder that this is an area that's been really been under-resourced, both in terms of finances and attention for so long. If I can move on to the next slide, I think is the wrap up. I think we have that. We may not. There we go. And just to say that it feels like over the last couple of years we've had some increasing consensus in terms of advocates and others coming together in some really productive ways. You heard some of that earlier in the forum, and to encourage that continue to happen. It's going to take, this is a challenging situation fiscally for the state in many respects, and yet it's also a huge opportunity as well, because we know that we have the resources to be able to make sure that kids can get off to a great start. So what I really want to encourage is for whatever perspective you're coming at this work from, and we've heard from a wide variety of perspectives today, you think about how we can work collaboratively with all those other perspectives to make sure that we're doing this work together. I want to especially thank Representative Damath for stepping in and joining today, and to hope that we all can carry out the spirit of the late Senator Ralph and continue to collaborate in a spirit of graciousness and partnership to make sure that every kid gets off to that great start. So thanks so much to everybody, and thank you, Jane, to you for moderating, and to our many presenters today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and all of you have a good day. Bye.